be in Mark chapter 12 today, and this is kind of part 2 of what we were talking about last week. As you remember, Jesus is with his disciples. It's the last week, the Passion Week, and he is with his disciples in the temple, and he has been confronted by a group of scribes, priests, elders, teachers of the law. Sadducees were the last group we talked about. So all of these groups that have influence in the life of the Jews at that time, they are religious leaders, have been shooting questions at him. And it's not so much that they want to know something, it's that they're trying to get him to trip up on his answers so they can accuse him, so they can discredit him. And there have been questions that have been about theology that they tried to get him to trip up on. There have been questions about paying taxes that they've tried to get him to trip up on, to get him in trouble with the Romans. There have been attempts to get him to say things that would turn the crowds against him. The last section you might remember was the Sadducees had kind of this complicated riddle of things that they didn't believe in, which was the resurrection. And they had this question about 7 brothers who married the same woman, and none of them had children, and they all died. And at the resurrection, whose wife would she be? And Jesus explained to them that their theology was a mess. Okay. And they didn't understand a thing. And he also ended that conversation by saying, you keep talking about that God is the God of the dead, and he's not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. And he goes back and he talks about the burning bush experience and what God said when he said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he alludes to the fact that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive. And so all of this is kind of silencing all of these folks. There's one last guy who's going to try it. He's going to come to Jesus and he's going to ask him questions. We're going to get into that today. He is, according to Matthew's gospel, a Pharisee. And after the Pharisees figured out that the Sadducees had failed in tripping up Jesus, they send this guy who's an expert in the law. So we're going to jump into this. Mark chapter 12, starting at verse number 28. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating, and noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? Now, understand that this guy is asking for one commandment, okay? One commandment. Give me the one commandment, the most important of the whole Old Testament. What is it? And the most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Verse 31, the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all the burnt offerings and the sacrifices. And then Jesus saw that he had answered him wisely, and he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. Okay, let's just take a look at this. So the guy is going to ask for what's the greatest, and Jesus gives him 2. He doesn't give him 1, he gives him 2 commandments. Interesting that he does that. Now, you have to understand that the love the Lord your God with all your mind, your soul, your strength, that comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 6. It is what is known as the Shema. The Shema. That chapter, there's more stuff in that chapter than what he just quoted. This is the chapter where, first of all, he did quote this. God, that understanding that God is one. Hear this, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And then he goes into, you must love the Lord, basically with everything you have. Everything you have has to be directed towards the love of God. And then from there on out, what it talks about is this is how you are to train your children. This is how you are to remember these commandments. You're to talk about it. You're to gather together and talk about it. You're to gather your children and talk about it. You are to wear them on your forehead. And so these folks would have known Deuteronomy chapter 6 very, very well, because not only does it say, love the Lord your God, okay, that's an expression of my heart, love the Lord your God, but it also gives some very definite things that you should do. Train your children, wear these scriptures, put them up on the doorpost of your house, put these scriptures on there.